a new Director General, Juan Samavia. He presented his idea and concept of decent work based on employment, social protection, social dialogue, and recognition of fundamental workers' rights. And then he thought, if we have this concept, we must be able to measure also decent work. We must be able to say, look, what is the level of decent work in these four categories people have? And then it turned out that it was very difficult to measure how are the core labor standards, in particular freedom of association and collective bargaining, recognized, or how can you measure this? And in 2002, the ILO started working on this, and they had some of their, I think, best brains applied to this and say, look, how can we measure workers' rights? And the idea is we measure it by violations. So we measure where in the country we have violations, and that is a way to measure the level of compliance with international labor standards. As you can imagine, this has been contested terrain from day one. So the ILO organized, had first their technical people working on it, producing working papers, then it organized a tripartite expert meeting to discuss this, then it went to the governing body, and the clearer the concept became, the more also it became controversial. And in 2012, the Deputy Director General of the ILO said that the ILO would not pursue this measuring of workers' rights violation any further because there was a feeling you couldn't get consensus. But what the ILO had done is, by and large, developed a very comprehensive methodology how to do it. And we basically, from the workers' side, we said in the governing body before, if the ILO is not do it, sooner or later an academic will pick it up and will do it. Now, in retrospective, things always look like a plan. Most things in life happen like an accident. So it was then that basically this Workers' Rights Center was thinking, look, this is an interesting methodology. We can work with the people who have developed this and have moved forward in doing it. And Mark will describe this now in detail, but I think what they managed to do is the most comprehensive, the most objective, the most balanced way of measuring workers' rights today available in the world. And I also think that if you look at the desire of the UN to measure their their sustainable development goals, and they have in the UN a request to measure workers' rights, then I think if the UN is really interested in measuring it, they can probably build this on what the colleagues at Penn State have developed. And at the same time, and I think Mark will go into this, it is a unique tool and a unique source of information also for trade unionists about the state of workers' rights in the countries. And with that, Mark, I give it to you.
Thanks, Frank. And this project wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Frank's initiative, vision, and support all along the way. It really did. When other people didn't believe in it, Frank was with us every step of the way. Before I got involved, he was supporting this. Actually, my job got a little bit easier for today in the sense that we just finished a promotional video on this. And there's about 3 people so far who've seen this. Frank hasn't seen it yet. So I'm going to show you the video. It's 99% done, so if there's any glitches, anything you see, any feedback you have, there's time for us to make changes. But we're gonna start off by, we'll go straight to the video. Let's go straight to the video, and then we can discuss it.
Labor markets are more equitable and societies are more democratic when workers can organize and bargain collectively. In many countries, workers' movements are at the forefront of overcoming authoritarian rulers and building fair societies. In spite of being one of the International Labor Organization's fundamental rights at work, as well as a human right enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there has been a shortage of available data to adequately measure their status globally. The labor rights indicators were developed by a team of international experts with support from the Center for Global Workers' Rights at the Pennsylvania State University and the Global Labor University. It provides information on the status of freedom of association and collective bargaining rights in more than 180 countries. It is based on 3 different indicators: overall labor rights in law, and labor rights in practice. By documenting and measuring violations of trade union rights, it offers an important knowledge base both for practitioners and researchers, and a unique tool in making such violations more visible and known. While countries have an obligation to respect human rights at work, when trying to exercise their rights, many workers continue to face difficulties or outright repression, and trade union rights continue to be heavily restricted. For 2015, 3,094 violations were documented. Around 60% of the violations were in law and 40% in practice. In 18 countries, restrictions result in the general prohibition of freedom of association and collective bargaining rights. In 16 countries, restrictions result in the general prohibition of the right to strike. Even in countries where workers are allowed to organize freely, trade union rights are often violated. The most frequent violations include exclusion of workers from trade union rights, discrimination against trade unionists, and lack of protection for workers who unionize, excessive requirements to establish trade unions and to go on strike, and arrest and imprisonment of trade unionists. For 2015, the overall trade union rights indicators show that the region with the worst scores is the Middle East and North Africa, while regions with the best scores are the EU and other developed economies. Thanks to its multi-layered design, the data can be searched in various ways, such as by score, by country, and by violation for each available year. Countries are scored on a 0 to 10 scale, where 0 is the best and 10 is the worst possible score. The first page allows users to get an understanding of the situation globally. By switching between the 3 maps, one can learn about existing trends in the overall trade union situation, the situation in law, and the situation in practice. On the scores page, the country-specific indicators are displayed. The more comprehensive information is provided on the country profile pages that bring together both the scores, the coded violations, and the actual text the scores are based on, providing accessible and transparent data. The Labor Rights Indicators website is an important contribution to the growing need for reliable information on compliance with labor rights. Consistent with its core mission, it was built on the premise that putting an end to trade union rights violations starts with making them known, and known as widely as possible. For more information on the database and the method, please visit our website, hosted at the Pennsylvania State University.
that gives you an overview of the website. That's the new promotional video. Again, any feedback, let me know, or send me an email or something, because we're finalizing it this month. I want to build on what Frank was saying, is using this as a tool, which is why we're talking about it while we go to the conferences, and we really want folks like you to start using it in campaigns, using it in a lot of different ways. I mean, this is, anyone here that's been involved in bargaining, information is power. When you're really in a tight situation, the side with more information often can win the argument. And so we're just providing this information. There's 108 different indicators on worker rights, and usually a lot of it's split 50-50. It's in law and it's in practice, right? So in law would be Bangladesh, you're prohibited from forming a union in an export processing zone, right? That's straight out in law violation. In practice, in El Salvador, you can form a union, but in practice, because of all sorts of forms of repression, you're not actually able to form unions in the export processing zone. So a lot of that 108 is divided between half in law and half in practice. I was going to show you a few examples and different things that I've done with it, but maybe first, just any questions from you about it? Feedback on that.
It's in the video. It was 2012 and 2015. It's still 2012 and 2015.
It is. We are, as we speak, coding 2016. A lot of the sources, we build on a lot of ILO sources, and a lot of the stuff's not available until June for the prior years. So we had to wait till June 2017, and then we started coding really in July, August, and we'll have 2016 done by the end of the year. We're also going to load up data from 2005 and 2009 that we already coded. We're going to add it to the website. But as we go forward, we're going to be in a cycle now, certainly from 2015, you're going to see it every single year as we go forward. So it's important. We realize that the data's only so good as long as you keep it up to date, and it's a lot of work. We're going through every major country in the world, over 180 countries, and measuring 108 things for each country. But we believe it's worth it. It took us a lot of time to find the right people to code it. You really need people who are both specialists from like a norms perspective in the ILO, as well as good at coding data and going through it. So we finally figured out the right team to do the coding.
Did you include somehow the number of workers in the country or number of enterprises? Like if you measure violations in practice, it matters probably. So.
Yeah, the weighting in that sense. It's a good question. The short answer is we don't have that on this website. There's others, and we're starting to link to other websites where you actually can find all sorts of demographic information on countries and so on. One thing to emphasize is the violation would be like an ILO committee of experts finds a pattern of violations in export processing zones. So let's say in Honduras there's a pattern of blacklisting for workers who try to form unions. It's not, when we put the count, it's not that they counted 3,000 cases, it's that Honduras got a check mark in that category for blacklisting. And it could have been 100 cases, it could have been 120 cases. It's the pattern that establishes the violation.
Mark, does it have any relationship with the survey that is carried on by the International Trade Union Confederation?
It does.
It seems quite similar.
It is. Well, yes, and there's a relationship there. But I should say, so the different sources we have, 6 are ILO sources, so you go through all the different supervisory mechanisms, and one is the ITUC source. Is this connected to the internet? So we code the survey, and the ITUC survey is actually very critical for us for the in-practice violations. A lot what we get from the supervisory mechanism would be in law. There's in practice as well, but the ITUC survey is very crucial in that regard. I think we're measuring more things than other approaches with the 108 indicators. Give me 1 second, I'm going to pull it up. Because it was mentioned in the video, and I can't emphasize this enough, how important it is that we also include the textual sources. So we don't just code it, like let's say the blacklist in Honduras. We copy and then upload to the website the actual ruling from the ILO or the data, the text from the survey. Yeah. Figure out how to find the database as I do this. To give you a chance to at the website as I pull this up. Okay, so this is, you can see at the top, this would be the website for this. So let me just pull up one country, in this case, Brazil. Profile. So here you see all the sources we're using. This is what gets coded. And here you see what you're mentioning, which is the ITUC survey. Now, I know this isn't a concern for a lot of folks in this room, but others that see the database wonder if some of our sources are biased in favor of trade unions. We think the IT survey is a very good instrument, but this checkbox actually allows you to remove one of the sources. So if you only want to look at ILO sources, you just click these off and they're removed. Or if you want to include them all, you can. Or if you want to take off everything and just see the ITUC survey, it will show up. Right? So that's the list of all the sources we coded. And then just to give you a sense of, so I'm pulling up Brazil here, it's showing you overall and in practice. Here I go into the right to form a union, I go into in law. And you see here 25, exclusion of, sorry, it's not showing up too clearly, exclusion of the right of workers to form a union. These letters show you each source where we found the violation. So C, country baselines, G, so national legislation, H, I. And then you click it, and this is where I said it pulls up the actual text of the violation, right? So let me just walk you through another, so you could find all sorts of data on the countries, the scores and the contextual sources. And if you're doing research, you're writing up a country, you're doing a mission to a country, there's just thousands and thousands of pages of text on these violations, the original sources. And if anyone had any questions, you know, when you do this kind of data analysis, people want to know, are you accurate doing it? We're 100% transparent. If you disagree with how we coded a case, you can read the text and decide for yourself. So all the text are there. Some of you may know there's a meeting coming up in the ILO on meeting of experts on export processing zones. So let me just show you something else you can do, and something I'll be doing. So we started off with the map page, and if you could follow me at the very top, you can go to countries. I could click it here, or I could get to the countries like I did through the map. But I'm going to go to violations. And I'm going here to the top where you could search for a violation, and I'm going to put in EPZs for export processing zone. Someone asked me the other day, and we talk about Bangladesh a lot, how many countries in the world still prohibit workers from forming unions in export processing zones? Well, we have indicator 24, exclusion of workers in export processing zones in law from the right to form a union. And in 3 clicks, I've got the list of countries that prohibit unionization export processing zones. You can read the slides on the package and enjoy Iran Bangladesh is, of course, on the list. And then here you get to the codes. Now, if I go back and do that again, remember what I told you? We have everything divided between in law and in practice. I put in export processing zones. Export processing zones again, and I go to 37. 37 is going to take me to in practice. So these are the countries now, the list is much longer, that there's a generalized practice of prohibiting unionization in export processing zones. Includes, you can see down here, Ghana, El Salvador, Costa Rica. And again, for any one of these, I can then go to, mouse is going too quick on me, I can though click it and get the full source. So you can imagine for this discussion coming up next month in the ILO about conditions in export processing zones, how this is going to help us to prepare for that meeting, that discussion. Questions?
Yeah, just could you clarify, did you have any difficulties accessing data from developing countries? I mean, like,
yeah.
Particularly in Africa,
Yeah.
there's a substantial variation in terms of the quality of data you can access.
Absolutely. So this is a really important question. Let me go back to the map. So the question is, do we have access to information or a difficulty in accessing information from regions? Let's, for example, in Africa, let me just pull up the case of South Africa. Yeah. It goes back, if you look at the list of sources, if you're a member of the ILO, and especially, this is an important distinction, if you ratified Conventions 87 and 98, which means you're going to be reviewed on a regular basis, no matter whether you're a small developing country or Russia or the United States, will have data on you. If you haven't ratified them, in those cases we go to national legislation and we review the law, which is a very cumbersome process, but we did it, for example, with the United States, which hasn't ratified Conventions 87 and 98. It does emphasize we're focusing on the right to form a union, the right to bargain, the right to strike. We're not getting into child labor, forced labor, and so on, which is why we focus on 87. So the data is actually overall pretty good. Where we do have some issues sometimes is, for example, with the survey the ITUC does, some countries, the organizations return the survey very quickly with plenty of information. In some cases, the survey doesn't get returned. We all know, if you've done surveys, how that is. Sometimes people are busy or they turn in the information or not. So we're not personally as a team going out and asking questions and gathering data. We're coding the information that's already available. So if there's some weaknesses because there's not regular reporting. The other case where there might be a deficiency in data would be, let's say, a country like Vietnam, where often you rely on the trade unions in a country to present petitions to the ILO that then get investigated. If the unions, because of their relationship with the government, aren't regularly using the ILO mechanisms, we'd have less data on those countries. In cases like that, certainly like China and Vietnam, we make an overall judgment about civil liberties in that country too, which impacts the score. So if you don't have a right to freedom of expression, we assume you're not going to have the right to form unions, even if there's a lot of documentation or current cases in the ILO about that.
What is the difference between violation in law and violation in practice?
Yeah, good question. So it's basically saying the law is just straight out. I haven't gone to a country, I haven't talked to anyone. I just sit down as a legal expert and open the law and read it alongside the ILO standards. And is this in conformity with international standards for that? So like I said, I mean, the easy case I was mentioning early, Bangladesh says straight out, you just don't have the right to form a union in an export processing zone. Outside the zones you can, but you can read that in the law, and it's going to be a clear in-law violation. You go to a country like Costa Rica or El Salvador, like I mentioned earlier, you're not going to find that in the law, but there's such a systematic practice that there might not be a single registered trade union or collective bargaining agreement in the export processing zones. In that case, it's not a problem. You can't find it in the law. It's not a problem in law. It's not an in-law violation, but in practice, it's such that the right is being effectively violated.
One more question. How is this normalized? What
So
is the way of normalizing?
Right. So it's a good question. So two things. We take the scores. It's on a scale of 0 to 10. What we did, the question we most struggled with was weighting, actually, when we normalized it to get on that scale. So the weighting means I'm a unionist and I'm going off to my job and I'm detained for an hour by the police and I'm released. I'm a unionist, I'm going to my job and I'm in Colombia and I get pulled aside and someone's killed, right? So technically you say one's a violation, but obviously we all know one is much more serious violation. So what we did in that process was we did this Delphi method where we surveyed experts from around the world and had them rank those violations, what they thought from less serious to most serious. And we averaged those scores, we sent it back to the experts, they had a chance to revise it, and that group of experts gave us the weighting for it. And we made a big effort to make sure we had folks from the Middle East, from Latin America, from Asia, South Asia, and so on. And that together combined allowed for. There is, I should say too, if clearly someone is very interested in the details of the methodology, I appreciate that. So we have on the About section of the page, we have a methods paper. Actually, Frederick Ebert is one of the supporters up here. It's the methods paper. So you go to the About page and sort of scroll to the bottom, and there's a very detailed methods paper that gives you a tremendous amount of information on this, on the normalization and a whole bunch of other factors related to this. Any questions? Please.
Frank mentioned the SDGs already. I think Go-Light was pretty much the only one that was still undecided last time I checked. But the indicator does say freedom of association and collective bargaining. So, are they using this or something similar to this? Is this the reason it's still undecided? It's because
it's right. So there's a process of review, and it's a very long process. And there's part of it gets into the method stuff. If you're looking at like a World Bank indicator on poverty that's been reviewed by statisticians and an accepted international indicator, it goes through pretty smoothly. If you're developing something new, then there's reviews involved, and that's partly where it's at. I think we're cautiously optimistic this will move forward. It's just a matter of going through those processes. We spent, other folks on the team, I pulled up in the paper a lot more time than I did, but a lot of time thinking through the methodology in so many different ways. We feel very, very confident about it. Just to give you a sense of what we did, so we have 9 different sources, 108 different indicators, Delphi method, normalization, and so on. The alternative was, did a country ratify or not ratify 87 and 98, and that was going to be the measure, right? So we think it's a much more nuanced, detailed measure of this, and it's going to get a lot more interesting as we build in those years, because we're allowed to start to see whether a country's making progress or not over time. And like all things, people get uncomfortable when you start putting down concrete numbers on this. And Frank knows this better than I do, being in the ILO, and you start talking about workers' rights for a long time, but you actually start scoring them and start seeing how countries do and how they're doing over time. There are people that get uncomfortable. But the goal is, of course, to improve things, and you have to have the right data and to start the discussion. That's wanting to contribute to.
Sorry for the methodological questions that we could speak
later afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But just one more.
How do you measure the weight of a specific violation in practice when it appears so many times? For example, just one killing, two killings, 100, 100,000. I'm thinking in Colombia, for example.
Right, exactly. It's a good question. It's actually, there's a long treatment of it in the paper. I wish it's a question of, you've got the weighting of the severity, severity versus the actual weighting, and that's something, you know, there's limits in what we're able to do because the sources themselves don't necessarily give us a count. Like if we're reading something from one of the supervisory mechanisms of the ILO or something, or even the IT survey, it might not actually, State Department reports or different things, it might not give us that number, but if the practice is so pervasive, it's going to start to affect a whole range of worker rights, and certainly you're going to see it reflected in the country score. But there's not an easy way to do that. It is an important question.
Can I ask one more? Sorry. Is there somebody? Okay. You see, when you are going from the violations and then violation in law and violation in practice, and then you go to the overall.
Right. That's right.
Now the question is that it seems to me that violation of law should get higher weightage. Isn't it? Shouldn't be? Is the weight on, so when we are going from the violation of law and violation of practice to the overall,
right,
is these two indicators getting the same weightage?
In the overall, it is in a sense. I mean, you could separate out. You could, if you're personally, feel, the in-law is, the more important factor. You'll see all the scores weighting on a 0 to 10 scale just for in-law, right? And then you could do separate for in-practice. But it's, this is, I think it's open for discussion, right? I mean, I could think of examples that go both ways, right? I mean, I could think of, right, it's a violation in law to do something, but maybe in practice certain things are permitted. Or in Colombia, the example that comes up, the law might seem very good, but you've got more unionists killed every year in Colombia than the rest of the world combined, right? So, we take a case like China or Vietnam, where you're just you're prohibited by law from having independent unions, right? So there's certain kinds of in-law violations which are extremely severe, and there's certain kinds of in-practice violations which are extremely severe, right?
Currently, the weightage is equal.
When you get to the overall, yeah. When you get to the overall score, but like again, so if we pull up a country, let me so this would be Brazil. Overall, I mean, how it's not averaged out, right? It's accumulating, but you have in law and in practice, and this here you'll see the normalized score. You could also see the scores that are not normalized. I really encourage you to go through. We're not going to go through the methods paper and ask questions by email afterwards, because it's a 40-page paper where we sort of try to walk through a lot of these more detailed questions, because they're very important questions.
This instrument is for labor rights in general, not only freedom of association and collective labor rights, just labor rights in general.
It covers. So let me go. It covers. Let me pull this here. So fundamental civil liberties, fundamental civil liberties would be like, freedom of expression and so on. Then the right to form a union, other union activities as they would be covered by 87 and 98, the right to collective bargaining and the right to strike. But not like it into things, if you think of the core conventions, it's not like discrimination, child labor, forced labor, and so on.
who does this study generally means when they rate. So first of all, this rating is done by some and it's done by some university or on demand. It is done, and the second thing is whether it is done by going on the field and taking the information, or it takes from the general what you can say like court cases and all. From that point of view, you reach to this study.
Right, sure. So we're sort of a team of three folks, academics connected to the ILO, that oversee it. We've hired a team of folks to code it, and a lot of them have experience with the ILO system, maybe worked with the norms unit of the ILO. And just saying a bit earlier that we're coding these 9 documents, so we're not like going on a plane to Colombia and doing interviews. We're going through the existing documents and reading them year by year, looking for the 108 indicators, each one of the 108. So these many, of course, you just that year, there's nothing for this one, that one, this one, the other one. But you'll start to find them, and we'll code them accordingly. So we're, again, reading existing documents and coding them. We're not doing original research in that sense. But the coders who, they're the ones that are really doing the brunt of this work. It's hard work to sit just going through stacks of documents electronically, reading, for one country after another, and checking this off and then normalizing it and uploading the data and so on.
So it means where the score is more, the corporate will move to that country first.
That's good. What is the time for this? Goes till, because there's some other question. Yeah, till 5:30. I was actually going to mention a few other sources that are out there, because this leads to a question of what this does do and what it doesn't do. This is country level data, right? Because we're looking at these country level reports. We get a bit into sectors, for example, with the export processing zones. But I did, because the topic today was broader. Let me see if I can close this out. Let's minimize it. I wanted to just mention, I'm not going to go through some of this. I did this on export processing zones. Just, when we want to do our research, the other thing we're really interested in is, what's going on for specific companies. And I just wanted to, this will be mostly on apparel because it's a sector I do. But there's now 100 brands that are publishing their full supplier list. We have the Accordion Alliance, where you can get pretty detailed information on building safety for over 2,000 factories. And there's this one website now, the International Corporate Accountability Roundtable, which has 38 different data sources now on companies and so on. So let me see if I can pull this up. There's this one British-based group called Fashion Revolution. Let's see if I can pull this one up. And this is where you get into the company level data. And they're doing, I think, some interesting stuff in there. So if you get onto this website, you get to the bottom, here's the list of all these different factories, and you can get factory names, locations, and so on. We could try to pull up one of these. This is taken, oh, it's not here. It didn't work. I've done it before for H&M and others. But this has become the latest push, right? Publishing first-tier suppliers, and the push now is to get into second and third-tier suppliers. And that website is listing, I think it's 108 companies altogether. And so this took us straight to the CNA. Because again, for a lot of what we do, the country level data is important, but the company level data is going to be more important. But anyway, this website will take you to that supplier database. Let me see if I can go back This is the other database. This one is even more complete. And again, I could share these websites with you. This will take you straight to an Excel spreadsheet with 38 different sources. Includes the Accord. It's not working on this computer. Excel. But 38 different sources, I encourage you to look at it. It's just, there's a lot of data out there. In fact, one of these foundations now just has a grant to see who can actually start using this data in a creative way. As activists and advocates and labor rights folks, we've been demanding a lot of this information be released. We're not entirely sure exactly how to use it yet, and it takes a lot of work. I spent time going through factory audits. In one case, I was looking at the Fair Labor Association. I spent 2 years reading their audits and actually trying to score companies and scoring the auditing firms to see who was doing a good job and a bad job. So first it's kind of resistance to be transparent, and then it's transparency in a way, though, that's dumping so much information on you we don't quite know how to process it. But information is there. And like I started off by saying, a lot of the struggles that we're waging is a lot of these are going to be decided by who has better information. Anyone who's been in bargaining or any sort of negotiation situation knows how much that matters. So I guess we could find ways to share these websites. I'm looking for something from the conference to share websites with folks to get access to all the websites, including the Penn State one. Okay. Other questions?
I was wondering if we could look at actually adapting it slightly, because one of my concerns with the decent work definition is that it tends to test violations, but it often doesn't test the decline in decent work.
Right.
So, with the increase in non-standard labor, for example, you may have had originally a certain industry where they had centralized bargaining, and then when it's fragmented, then you still got bargaining, you still got trade union freedom, but the capacity is much lower, so there's a decline in conditions, even in contractual security. So but they will still be able to tick all the boxes in terms of decent work. And I think it's important for us, it's actually a different category, but it's important for us to measure that, because a lot of countries and also specific industries are experiencing that.
Right, I think that's right. I mean, I think that the time trends, let me show you, I skipped over this earlier, let me show you something I was just doing for a paper I was working on, and how I brought in the data. So we're still uploading it, but I have some of the earlier data. So a higher score is a bad score. So I looked at Bangladesh, and I wanted to see the trend over time in worker rights. And this is how the score went from 2000, 2005 up to 2015. And folks that know my research, I look at pricing dynamics and what factories are being paid to make goods in Bangladesh. So I put one on top of the other. What I was arguing, as the factories get squeezed with price, worker rights violations go up. And again, I think what you're saying is so crucial. We want to see trends over time. With all this talk about decent work, with all these mechanisms we have, all sorts of forms of CSR that are emerging, are things getting better for workers, or are they not? And if they're not, as I've been arguing, then why not? And part of, this is just a simple graph to show, all these companies, firms that are going to Bangladesh and they're signing to the Accord and to the Alliance and making all sorts of pledges, but at the same time, they're pushing that time and time again downward on price. And factories, when they do that, they're trying to figure out how to stay in business. And I argue, you see this, price goes down and you squeeze wages and other factors related to the economics of the firm, but you also squeeze out unions, because if the price point is going down and you have tighter margins, the last thing you want in the mentality of a factory owner is a unionized workplace. So I'm correlating this decline in price paid to the rise in worker rights violations. But as we gather more data, like I said, we'll be posting these years soon, and then we'll put up 2016, probably by January or February. You'll be able to go to any country in the world and do what I did there with that kind of graph. I have a bigger one that I'm doing for all the major apparel exporting countries, and we see a very similar trend. Countries that are highly dependent on apparel exports are more likely to see a rise in worker rights violations.
Did you somehow take into consideration whether it should be taken into consideration that there are workers, sectors which have voice and those which don't have voice, and those which are in focus of international community or are better organized to like make their message that there are some violations? And there are sectors and like workers who are not organized to make message by themselves. They don't have resources for that. They don't have links with international community, like who deal with labor rights. Did you somehow take it into consideration? It's one question. Another one, did you take into consideration like the structural limitation to independent unionism in form of yellow unions? Like when yellow unions prevail, and this actually makes independent unionism almost impossible in some countries.
Right. Those are really important questions, and I mean, there's, for me personally, I think of the question as two ways I think of it. One is what we're able to do or not do with the database project, and the other is personally what I do as a researcher, which is I get into a lot of these questions. A lot of my dissertation focused on the use of yellow unions to keep progressive unions out, referred to as the left flank effect. As the left unions became stronger, employers were more likely to bring in yellow unions to shut out the left unions, right? They wanted to be union-free, but if given the choice, they would rather have a yellow union than a progressive union. And we could find data for that. How this affects the database project is it gets back to the sources. So, and this also gets to the chicken and the egg problem. I mean, what are we trying to do by documenting these worker rights violations is to put a spotlight on the places where those violations are the most severe and where workers don't have voice. The chicken and the egg problem is to document it, you often need workers to speak up, if nothing else, to fill out the survey or the petition to say they have the problem. And when there's severe worker rights violations are happening, they're not able to do that. So we don't get all the information from certain countries that we would like. A lot of union offices are stretched to their limits with resources. So you go to a more developed country and their unions, they've got people in all sorts of different tasks doing different functions. They have full-time researchers and so on. In other union offices, one person is doing 5 different tasks and so on. And then we send them a survey to fill out, and there's no one available at that time to do it. So this does affect the data. I mean, one message is when you get those survey requests, it's really important for everyone to do them. The best we can do is balance it by other things, like the ILO mechanisms. Like I said, whether you have a union for that petition, certain things are going to be reviewed every time the review process comes up, and it's going to be documented. So if we can't capture it one way, we hope we can capture it in another way. But again, long term, the goal is to strengthen worker rights, so all workers have the voice to defend their rights and to document the violations when they take place.
I have a question. One is just a quick clarification. I thought I heard you say you're planning to publish in the next round of this database more charts like these, or is it you're saying you're doing that for your own research?
I was talking my own research. These kind of charts is what I've been doing with the database. The next round will be what we'll do in the next. So right now, for what I was putting up, you can see this and this. You can see 2012 and 2015. So we're both working on getting 2016 up to date, not this chart. And we're going to upload these prior 3 years that we have. This is just my own for one country case, Bangladesh.
So you have in your database, the projects database, you actually have information going back that far for most countries?
We have this for the whole world, 2000, 2005, 2009.
Okay. And what if the country isn't a garment, main garment industry country? Are you using a different industry as a similar, because the database isn't only focused on the garment industry, so yeah, what are you using as the proxy for the price then if it's not, or is it always garment just to keep it consistent?
This is just my own personal research. I do the garment sector. I mean, these are country level findings for Bangladesh. And so when I do the garment research, I went through and I looked at it two ways. Who are the top apparel exporters in the world? So China's, of course, #1. But then I asked the question differently, which is, what's the percentage of apparel of your overall exports? And a country like Haiti all of a sudden is above China because China has so many other exports, but Haiti is very dependent on apparel exports. So I would think then what's going on for apparel is going to affect overall the national conditions for labor in Haiti because it's so apparel dependent. But that's just my own methodology. This is what you get from it. If you're studying autos and you wanted to do a similar analysis, who are the major auto exporters in the world and what are the labor conditions in the major auto exporters, electronics, and so on. Would be a way to do that with this data.
Okay, thanks. And then the other quick question away from that was, have you been approached or do you know of any governments or intergovernmental organizations or larger initiatives that you hadn't guessed before we're going to use this database in a way that they now are using, or maybe industry groups? I don't know what other groups could potentially use it, but in a few years that you've published it, have you seen any practical use of the information for policy or something else?
We just fairly recently put up 2015, and there wasn't a lot you could do with just 1 year, 2012. So I think we haven't seen that much. Partly we're just doing this promotional video and we really want to get more folks using it. We realized we needed to put up more data to have that happen. And if it were to be that this were to be considered by the Sustainable Development Goals, right? So folks, right, you had the Millennial Development Goals and moved to the Sustainable Development Goals with the important variation, which is that when we got to the Sustainable Development Goals, it was decided any indicator listed would have to have a way of measuring it. Any goal would have to have a way of measuring it. So once you put in 8.8 is it on worker rights, once you just put the word down, now it can't just be nice words. Then countries will have, as they go forward, report on whether they're making progress or not. And the question is, okay, are we making progress? Each country, I think I am, I think I'm not, whatever. Well, we're trying to see if people consider this database as the source to go to. So not only, just by word of mouth, there will be an obligation to refer to this database and to use it to report when you report on that particular sustainable development goal.
That's great.
Hi, yeah. So I was wondering more about the green line. Where did you get the data for the meter?
This green line?
Yes. Where, because that has been a major struggle also of unions in order to support their arguments to get really prices for like buyer prices per piece or whatever. So do you have any sources for that?
Yeah. It was curious. I'll tell you a little backstory to it. So it's the price per square meter for the U.S. and you can do this euros per kilogram for the European Union, either a specific country or the European Union as a group for any product or group of products. It started because I was in a discussion with a factory owner in Honduras, and a lot of us were just trying to see who's the #1 exporter and how do things score. And we just went to dollar values, and you could go to the U.S. government website for trade or the European Eurostats for trade. And he told me, he says, I don't use the dollar value because it doesn't control for inflation. I use square meters, or you could use units. And I just started thinking about something. That's interesting. I started, okay, I'll use units. It's controlling for inflation, right? If the chart's going up, is it because of changes in the currency, or is it going up because you actually exported more? Well, exports in units or square meters tell you that answer. Why not divide, right? I mean, there's a debate: do you use dollars or do you use square meters? Why don't you divide? And then you get dollars per square meter. And then this is a short period of time. I think this is nominal. But I was going back to 1989 when the data were first put out, and you go back that far, you have an issue of inflation. So then I would find a deflator for apparel and did the real dollar price per square meter. And this is, I put it here for trousers, and there's a reason for that, because I went through all the apparel exports from Bangladesh to the US, and it turns out that men's and boys' cotton trousers were the #1 export. Because otherwise, I was saying this in an earlier panel, maybe back here they were exporting dresses and now they're exporting socks, right? So you had a different product mix and you're comparing apples and oranges. So if you do this kind of analysis, you want to control for the product and just do one product. So that's what I did. Now I will say too, there's a whole, I'm going to give a talk tomorrow afternoon. I get into some of the breakdown of my own research. For apparel, this is giving what the apparel industry would refer to as landed costs. So it's when it gets to the US. So if I was in Bangladesh and I wanted to try to nitpick a bit, I said, well, how much of this is the change in oil prices, or how much of this is the change of cotton prices or something else? So this is what I'll talk about tomorrow. Then I went to Bangladesh and did a survey to figure out the cost within Bangladesh to separate out what might have been transportation costs or raw material costs. So this gives us a first cut at it, and I find it matches that. It's not fluctuations in oil prices or transportation. It's a price squeeze within the country that's going on by and large.
Thanks. I just had another question about the labor indicators. Is there a way to combine them or treat them in a way that you can argue that you can connect them to some of the previous indicators? So Lena Mosley's project that goes up to, what is it, 2000? Or 2001, whatever, so that you can say, actually, okay, I use her data up to 2001, and then I can reasonably argue that this indicator, at least parts of it or whatever, I can use to continue that trend to see if I can actually look back to the 90s or 80s or whatever it is.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So it's an interesting story, actually, because the person who developed a lot of this in the ILO had an earlier version where there were only 37 measures, and this researcher in the US mostly took that and coded it herself and did a 20-year span. So for her data, you're looking at the 37 indicators, and this is 108. Now, anyone that studies even government statistical sources and stuff, you sort of see sometimes these time series graphs, and there's a little funny bump, and there's a footnote at the bottom, and it says that, in 2001, the mechanism for measuring this shifted. So there might be statisticians that have a better way of doing that, but it is an important difference going from, again, 37 worker rights indicators to 108. If someone who's more clever than I might be, just doing a graph. I mean, she is doing multivariate regression analysis, and then you want to control for that. You might even use a country year indicator variable to see if that shift from 2001 to 2002 statistically significant.
So my question is that when this graph was made, when this data was made using the methodology, during the scoring process, was the social means of productions analyzed during the scoring process? Means the aggregate question and the development of the trade unions?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the entire question.
Means actually, to specify the difference between the trade unions. There's a different types of trade unions in the movement. Means was this taken into consideration during the scoring process?
Different types of trade unions?
Yes, means
does it take that into consideration?
The ideologies.
Right,
ideology. Demand and
right. In a short answer is no, in a sense. I mean, we're going from the data that's available now. I'm trying to think of an example, though, a more nuanced answer to it. Let's say, you're in Mexico, and you've got the governing party PRI, which has official unions connected to it. And let's say you've got an independent unionist trying to form a union in a certain sector. And we know there's cases where official unions might actually be connected to thugs that beat up independent unionists for forming a union. Now that case of those independent unionists trying to form a union getting blocked out, would be registered as a violation of their right. Now, you and I would know that there's, an ideological difference between the independent unionist and the official unionist, but what's being registered is the act that one union, used thugs to beat out another unionist. The act of preventing legitimate unionization is not being registered. That this one is, I don't know the term we might use, accommodationist, and this one is more militant or transformative or ideological orientation.
No, and it means the relation of the market conditions means the capital market.
That's it.
The relation of the means market condition.
Right.
Means their ideology and the relation of the market condition means the capital market.
Right.
Means was this taken into consideration in the score? Means the scoring process.
The market conditions, or the
yes, means the relation between the market condition and the ideological positions of the trade unions.
Right.
Means was this taken into consideration? Means when scoring the means when in that sector means in practice means rights in practice.
No, and the short answer is no. That's not something we were able to do. But I just want to emphasize too, and even look like just a very simple graph. What I did here, I think the most interesting things become when you start combining data sets, right? So you could take the country level measures and you can bring in market conditions if you want. And this is what people something I necessarily do, that they're into econometrics and so on. You can start looking at unemployment rates, you can start looking at GDP growth rates, you can start looking at a variety of factors in the worker rights indicators. And then you might want to combine it with field research or anthropological research of understanding unions and where the unions are coming from. So you would have to combine the data we're able to offer here with the more nuanced forms of data you're talking about.
The microeconomic conditions means the microeconomic conditions in a specific country.
Right.
Means the microeconomic parameters in a specific means a region, economic region means were taken into consideration.
Right. So the economic, you said microeconomic
yes,
at the regional level? Yes. This is first, it's national level data. And like I said though, it's those factors, to a certain extent, considering this national level data, if you're looking at more macroeconomic indicators, you could very easily combine it. I mean, this is, a lot of people do this. You download this, you can do it in Excel spreadsheets of scores, and you can go to the World Development Indicators and download variables on GDP growth, inflation rate, unemployment rate, all sorts of other factors, and you could look for associations and so on. You could ask empirical questions. I mean, some of the stuff my colleagues are looking at is, do worker rights improve the more open a country is to foreign direct investment, or do they go down? And this has been a debate that's been going on for a very long time among scholars, and they're finding evidence that how greater exposure to foreign direct investment could actually bring down respect for worker rights. But to get at that, you take this database on worker rights and you combine it with other databases on foreign direct investment, trade, whatever variables that would be of interest to you. That makes sense. So you really need to combine databases to get at that.
Just to ask real quick about the last thing you said. When you find out about
other scholars or other researchers who are using that information and creating these sort of more complex databases and trying to find associations. Are you putting them in one place? Because sometimes it's hard to know that those things come out just if you're not in the know, or maybe you don't even know about it at first. So when you find out about it, are you putting it on like some sort of web page that shows other people using this information, or haven't done that yet?
No, I'm trying to think. We're connecting to some other bigger databases that have all sorts of information, demographic information, education, all sorts of things. We haven't done it. It's a good point. We're trying to pull in more and more some data sources into our website to sort of be a center for worker rights, but a center for data on worker rights as well. But it's a really good point.
If somebody uses the FBI, for example, I mean, I think that would be a really awesome feature on the website. Like, here's what somebody did with this data.
Yeah, exactly. No, my colleagues have been more productive than I have. They've got a series of papers using the data. We can start posting more of those. How we are for time too in the next session. I thought it was this. Okay. So if no more questions, I think we'll end it there. But please email me if any other thoughts come up. I really appreciate this feedback. And if you have any little details of how we might tweak that the video, please let us know, because this is the window we have before the end of the month. We're going to finalize it. So thanks, everybody. Finally,